Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Transportation Electrification, a Guide to Planning, Deployment, and Operation. We're excited to have you. I'm Laura Beth Ezel with Utility Dive's Brand Studio, and I'll be moderating today's event. In this presentation, hosted by West Monroe Partners and joined by leading utility EV program leaders, we'll provide insight and best practices in planning, developing, and optimizing transportation electrification programs. Now, based on feedback from major electric utilities, today's webinar will discuss integrated program management that can benefit any emerging or existing initiative around EV charging infrastructure and EV adoption for light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicle programs. But before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. Now, to enlarge the slides, click on the Enlarge Slides button that's located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, just click on the Help widget that's located on the bottom left corner of your console. Now, we encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of this presentation. Now, after the presentation, you will also be able to access the on-demand recording of the webinar using the same link from today's live event. Now, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have Tom Hulsbosh. He is a Senior Managing Director, Energy and Utilities Practice at West Monroe Partners. We have Andrew Gillen, Senior Principal, Energy and Utilities Practice at West Monroe Partners. Carolyn Weiner, Manager, Electric Vehicle Programs at PG&E. We have Arnie Kahn, Electric Car REV Demonstration Project at Consolidated Edison. And we have Lisa Ariani, Senior Manager, Business Development and Partnership, Transportation Electrification at Southern California Edison. So we've got some great experts here. And I just want to go over what each of them will be sharing with you. Now, Tom is going to focus on key trends in transportation electrification. Andrew is going to talk about program design and management. Carolyn is here to talk about transportation electrification at PG&E. And Lisa will talk about transportation electrification at SCE. And Ari will talk about electric car REV demonstration project at Con Edison. At this time, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tom. Tom?
Thanks, Laura Beth. Appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to do is give you guys a little bit of an overview of what's happening within the EV space. So why is this a big deal? As you can see on the slide, in 2018, new car sales for electric vehicles. And when we say electric vehicles here, we mean pure EVs like your Teslas and Leafs, but also those plug-in hybrids, like the Volt and the new Volvos coming out and cars like that as well, right? But they passed the 1 million electric vehicle mark in 2018. The forecast of the EVs is really something to behold. We'll talk a little bit about why this is, but different forecasts are looking at numbers as high as 100 million by 2030. And another one we noticed was looking at the total number of EVs hitting about 35% of all car and light truck markets by 2040. That's pretty amazing compared to where we're at, as you can imagine, right? A couple of the key things that are driving that growth. One is the range anxiety. That's when you're driving your EV and you're worried about running out of electricity. I just had that happen to me the other day. I pulled into my regular parking lot in Chicago with a whole 3 miles left in my tank. And I got there and the EV charging station was dead for some reason, so I had to find another parking lot. So it was blinking on 1 mile left by the time I found the spot. And so that range anxiety is truly it's a real thing. Now the average car coming out, pure EVs are around 200 miles, which is pretty phenomenal compared to where we were 6 years ago. The premium between the gas vehicles and the EV equivalent is also dropping pretty significantly. I think that's pretty amazing. And then when you talk to people who own EVs, they can tell you, about the cost of operations, how low they are. So those are some interesting reasons of why it's being driven. Let's take a look a little bit more at the industry trends and maybe why these industry trends are happening. So if we look at from a consumer perspective, right, the operational costs for the EVs compared to the gas that you would put into, for the equivalent miles, not to mention the services, right, are significantly less. So your CapEx, if you will, right, for your EV is a little bit higher than the equivalent vehicle, but your OpEx is much lower. So it's an interesting time value of money type of play. Most customers don't think of it like that, but that is how you can run your business case on your EV. And now, of course, with that price differential between the EVs and their fossil fuel equivalents decreasing, that business case looks better and better. Myself, I've got a couple of EVs. I've got one of the original Leafs, and I also have a Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid. And it saves, each one of those cars saved me about $1,000 to $2,000 a year in operations costs, depending on the miles driven, and the relative price of gas and stuff. So those are really good customer benefits. Also, it does make me feel good about trying to do something about climate change. And being in the industry, I get to kind of run the numbers and see what difference it really is in terms of when I drive a mile on an EV versus a fossil fuel vehicle, right? It does make a pretty big difference. The other thing that we're going to be talking about today, it's really exciting, and it's great to have the panelists from Con Ed and PG&E and Southern Cal Edison here to talk about these different kinds of charging stations. These different kinds of charging stations, as we hear about this, really can decrease that range anxiety and provide a lot of different options on how to charge your EV. I think these are going to be some of the real key elements of these programs that we're talking about, which is going to encourage more people taking the plunge into buying electric vehicles. On the utility side, the transportation electrification can really help the utilities meet greenhouse gas emission requirements, and Andrew's going to talk more about that in a little bit. The transportation electrification really delivers an interesting opportunity for upgrades in certain areas of the network, right? So you're going to see some pretty amazing requirements for some of these larger EVs, such as buses and trucks, and when we're aggregating EVs like 10 at a time at a location, sometimes we're going to have to actually upgrade some of the infrastructure, right? So that's a good capital investment opportunity in the utility. I think there's IT enhancements that we're going to have to make. And then finally, there's a big load growth opportunity here. Now, I think that we'll hear more about is how do we combine the load growth opportunity of EVs in such a way that we increase the system utilization, right? So we want to increase the system utilization, and we want to minimize the increase in peak requirements for the utility. And that's going to be this matching of kind of demand and pricing, if you will, around intelligent charging. So if we combine the incentives, like you're going to hear about the programs today, and if we combine that with intelligent charging rates, we can actually increase the utilization of the system without increasing the peak demand correspondingly. Okay. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Andrew to talk more about EV transportation programs. Andrew?
Great. Thanks, Tom. There's been a steady buildup in the regulatory and state drivers for transport electrification. There's over 20 states that have both GHG targets as well as RPS mandates. So that's been building up, and now you're beginning to see transportation electrification targets coming on into the regulatory proceedings. And there's key implications for the utility, but as Tom referenced, one of the most positive outcomes is that transport electrification and electric vehicle charging can be aligned to really increase the utilization of the grid. You can align the charging to those low pockets of time when the grid is underutilized. And that really delivers value for the utility and ultimately could produce lower prices for the customers. There will be some new infrastructure investment required. If you think about a EV bus depot, which today runs on runs on fuel. In the future, you're going to need megawatts of new energy services to provide energy charging for those buses. And so there's going to be a new investment there, but there is going to be opportunities for interesting programs that benefit utility and the customer, like demand response, the ability to incentivize customers to shift their energy usage. We're beginning to see new rate structures around EVs. I have a Volt, and I charge it specifically according to the PG&E rate structure at the lowest rate of the day, and it's actually programmed into my car. So I automatically plug it in, walk away, and it will turn on and off according to the rate windows. So that's some interesting new opportunities with utilities to work with customers in that way. We're also seeing the need for more eyes and ears on the grid. As you start seeing EV loads building up, utilities do need to plan ahead for monitoring, visibility, and data collection around EV usage. I think a key takeaway is that if unmanaged, if the EV charging is not aligned to the low load times of the day, you actually could see the system utilization get worse. And so that's a key takeaway for today's discussion. We do have a great panel today that's going to be talking about the opportunities to get ahead of these changes and these challenges. There's a lot of organizational change that happens. There's a lot of new activities. But we'll be talking with the panel today about how to build a view to costs and benefits, things that will be used to build a business case, and socialize these with your regulators and begin to even look at building your funding requests. For those of you on the call that are early in your stages, you may be looking at how do you present this to your regulators, and hopefully you'll come away from today's webinar with an understanding of how to build that business case on a layered value stream basis. We'll be talking about how to define those benefits, and within the organization we'll be talking about how to build a program from the ground up and all the different departments that need to be engaged early on, really end-to-end approach. Specifically, the panel is going to be talking about what is a successful program for transport electrification. What are those key elements? And I think you'll be hearing a lot of talk about how critical it is to have cross-departmental collaboration. You're going to have engineering, you're going to have sales, customer experience, legal, a lot of different involvement that needs to be brought together. There's a need for technology solutions, software, to support that workflow end-to-end. And we see that end-to-end workflow starting with a sales and marketing customer outreach, going through a customer onboarding and eligibility review, through to some technical studies, onboarding, and eventually going into design and implementation of programming, like deploying 10 or 20 chargers at a parking lot that's never seen that before. There's construction, there's build-out, there's new metering that goes in. And then once you've completed the implementation, what do you do with those EVs to align them to the grid? So I think we've got a great panel today to introduce key success factors for the program. I'll hand that back to the moderator.
All right, Tom and Andrew, thank you for that great setup as we move into our utility panelists, who are each going to give us an overview of their EV program, and they're going to provide an update on the transportation electrification program at their utility. We're going to start with Carolyn with PG&E. Carolyn?
Great. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here today. I thought I would start off with a little bit of a comprehensive view of all our different investments within transportation electrification. So we've, over the last several years, been building up a portfolio of strategic opportunities that we really feel help minimize or kind of tackle some of the main market barriers that are out there facing this industry today. So first and foremost, really looking at cost of ownership. There's different areas that we've pursued, in particular looking at incentives and rate options to help minimize the total cost of ownership for our customers when they're looking at their vehicle options. The second piece is infrastructure. So it's a lot of the discussion today, and I'll go into our key infrastructure programs that we are pushing live today. But in general, really trying to build a portfolio of offerings for all our various customers that we serve in our territory, and really, again, achieve access to infrastructure to help beef up this market as we move forward. Second is education and buying experience. We're, again, as you've heard earlier with the other speakers, we're very much, we're seeing momentum build in this market, but it's still very early stage. There's a lot of information awareness necessary for consumers to understand what decisions they need to make, and even business customers are looking for infrastructure investments as they move forward. And lastly, we've been, over the years, doing a variety of demonstration projects and pilots to assess what grid benefits we can see from this marketplace, so helping establish what that might look like in the future as we bring on more electric vehicles into our marketplace. And to start off, I want to cover our flagship program. Our EV Charge Network program has been in operation for a little over a year now. And it is really to tackle kind of one of the primary areas for charging, which is away from home charging. So consumers out there that are obviously the next place that they spend a lot of their time will be at work outside of the house. And so this program is really trying to enable charging accessibility at people's workplaces, or in particular for tenants that live in apartment buildings. So again, another area that's been a challenge to get access to infrastructure. So the main target for this program is over the next 3 years, so through 2020, we'd install 7,500 ports across workplaces and what we call multi-unit dwellings. We do have specific kind of customer demographic targets, so really to tackle kind of hard to reach areas. Includes at least 20% of those ports being developed in apartment buildings, and then at least 15% in what we call disadvantaged communities. So those areas of our territory that have the hardest or more substantial pollution just due to various industry or other process that have increased the greenhouse gas emissions in those particular areas. So we really want to help inject some opportunities in those specific communities. And then we also, in our design, developed an option for our company to own a percentage of the chargers that get installed. So there are two options for the customer, including either owning the chargers themselves, or they can allow PG&E to own it in specific circumstances. Overall, I can say in the first year of operation, we've been able to install 594 ports across our territory, and we have over 2,000 ports planned in design and construction for 2019, and that's continuing to grow. We've been very successful in targeting our multi-unit dwellings and disadvantaged communities in our region with very specific targeted marketing and education, and we're very excited to see some of the success of those engagements. Next up is our EV Fleet program. This is a new program that we are in the middle of launching. We expect to have launched in February. This tackles the next major market, which is medium and heavy duty vehicles, a very nascent market that really needs a lot of investment to help drive some adoption. So in particular for this program, the one thing I'd highlight that was part of the design is actually validating that our customers are committing to purchase electric vehicles themselves. While in EV Charge Network, we don't necessarily require them to demonstrate some level of, commitment from their employees, I would say, or the tenants that they're buying electric vehicles on the onset of the infrastructure being developed. In this case, we are having to establish certain parameters with our customers that participate to make sure that they are committed to procuring at least 2 medium or heavy-duty vehicles as part of their participation. So definitely a nuance we've been working on how to kind of implement and market, how to educate customers. And in particular, it pushed us to really work closely with vehicle OEMs in particular to help drive our site acquisition as we move forward. And then lastly, I want to touch on the other component of our infrastructure programs that are going live this year, which is DC fast charge. So separate from looking at workplace charging or fleet charging, we wanted to also support on-the-go charging and really build a network of chargers in our territory. So this program allows us about $22 million to be used over 5 years to install over 200 DC fast chargers across key kind of corridors within our territory. Again, all these programs have key kind of community and customer demographic targets. In particular for this one, there's specific investments we need to make in those disadvantaged communities like you saw for Charge Network. And this one we'll be getting off the ground in the coming first half of this year as well. And that's it for us. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. We are now going to move next to Lisa with SCE, who is going to give us her program overview. Lisa?
Thank you. So SCE has made significant progress since launching our first pilot program in 2016. And I'm going to share some of those successes as well as our plans to expand our program offerings in the coming years. To date, our focus has been on supporting the adoption of passenger vehicles through rebates for the vehicles, as well as supporting infrastructure to serve charging stations for those light-duty vehicles, as well as for transit buses and port equipment. In the state, we now have about 500,000 EVs registered. That's nearly half of the U.S. total. SCE is providing up to $1,000 rebate per vehicle for our residential customers who purchase an EV, and that includes used electric vehicles as well as new ones. We've distributed 55,000 rebates to our customers since 2017. We also, through our Charge Ready pilot program, which launched in 2016, have been installing level 1 and level 2 charge ports at workplaces, multi-unit dwellings, destination centers, and for some light-duty fleet vehicles. We just received another $22 million of funding to continue that program, and we'll be installing another minimum of 1,000 charge ports through that program. We also currently have a pilot underway which will be installing 14 DC fast chargers in urban areas, and that is meant to support folks living in multi-unit dwellings who may not have charging available at home. So we've targeted disadvantaged communities with a high population of multi-unit dwelling residents who don't currently have access to DC fast charging. Another of our pilots is in the transit sector. So we have a pilot to support charging infrastructure for electric buses, and are working with 3 agencies in our territory to install 31 charge ports to support those buses. And we also have pilots underway at the Port of Long Beach, where we're helping to electrify rubber tire gantry cranes and 20 yard haulers, which will be installed later this year. Looking towards our future plans, this April we'll be launching our Charge Ready transport program to support charging infrastructure for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. We have $356 million of approved funding to electrify a minimum of 870 sites and convert at least 8,490 vehicles. And that's Class 2 through 8 vehicles, as well as off-road equipment, such as port equipment, electric refrigerated trucks, the whole gamut, if you will, of medium and heavy-duty vehicles. That also targets transit agencies, school buses, warehouses, ports, delivery vehicles, heavy-duty trucks, again, a whole range of medium and heavy-duty vehicles. And customers who are operating transit buses or school buses will be eligible for rebate on the charging equipment that they install, as well as sites located in disadvantaged communities who participate in that program. This program will be launching in Q2 of this year. I'll share what we plan to do to expand our Charge Ready pilot, and our transit agency customers will continue to be served by our medium and heavy duty program. And we also currently have a pilot underway to support at-home charging. So we're providing a $500 or $1,500 rebate to offset the cost of wiring and installation costs in single-family residences. So building on the success of our Charge Ready pilot and the approval of our Charge Ready Transport program and other unique pilots, SCE has filed for our Charge Ready 2 program, which would be a 4-year program with the goal of installing 48,000 charging stations. We took lessons learned and customer feedback from our pilot to make enhancements and improve our offerings for this large-scale program. So in short, it would propose to deploy 32,000 level 2 ports at approximately 3,200 workplaces, apartments, destination centers, and fleet sites. But we also propose to install an additional 200 DC fast chargers through this program. For new apartment building construction, we proposed a rebate of up to $3,500 per port for those builders who exceed the building code and install charging ports at their new construction multi-unit dwellings. We also propose to offer apartment building owners and government customers a turnkey solution where SCE would install, own, and maintain the up to 4,200 new charging ports at these types of locations. And finally, we included a multi-pronged marketing strategy to include mass media, advertising EVs and their benefits, targeted marketing on the EV experience, supporting business customers in their fleet conversion, and program-specific marketing. As Carolyn touched on, there's still a great need in terms of raising awareness of electric vehicles to promote adoption. And so our Charge Ready 2 filing looks to expand our market education and outreach activities. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you. Next, we are going to move to Ari Khan. He is with Con Edison and with his program overview. Ari?
Great. Thank you very much for having me. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about how Con Edison analyzed the electric vehicle market and what we identified as our primary aspirations. So when looking at the electric vehicle market, we took the sort of 10 most common use cases and looked at their total cost of ownership. And the rationale there was it makes that that our actions are fairly limited if the total cost of ownership for an electric vehicle is not going to be positive. There are very few users who would take that value proposition. But the good news was that most of the use cases in New York either are positive today or will be soon. So some of those include, obviously, people who have their own dedicated charging who are able to charge off peak using a light-duty car, fleets, so delivery vehicles. Of course, they require certain preconditions like having the right type of vehicles available, but be that as it may. Transit has the potential to be very beneficial for the operators, and school buses, for-hire vehicles, et cetera. So all of those are pretty common fleets in New York City, and we identified all of them as having a good EV value proposition. Then we identified what our main goals were in the market. And the first was to increase electric vehicle miles traveled, electric passenger miles traveled. And the distinction between vehicle miles traveled and passenger miles traveled is that there are a lot of New Yorkers who don't own a car. In fact, I think it's over 3/4 of New Yorkers don't own cars. So making sure that they're being well served is important. And then, of course, maximizing the benefits for all ratepayers. So given that our system is summer peaking, it's really important that charging a car off peak and not during those periods of high demand. So given that, and then finally we had sort of several levers at our disposal. We have energy efficiency programs, existing tariffs, and then something called REV demonstration projects, which allows us to test new business models, not just in electric vehicles, but in numerous types of customer engagement and distributed generation. So the first category of good potential users were transit and school buses. The MTA has 10 electric buses operating in its fleet today. We're showing you a picture of an overhead pantograph charger that's situated under the Williamsburg Bridge. So we've been working with the MTA first and foremost to help them site these type of chargers. They operate between 300 and 500 kW. So siting where where they can get the service economically and also speedily is important. And then finally, working with them also to help make sure they're not charging during peak periods. So we expanded a program of ours that we'll talk about later to include medium and heavy duty vehicles and this program incentivizes off-peak charging. Picture on the right shows an electric school bus that's on the streets of New York. Currently, there are 5 of them operating in North White Plains, and they are fully electric. And we helped fund them through a demonstration program. They operate as transit buses now during the school year, and over the summer period, they'll perform as distributed generation resources, basically as batteries, discharging to the grid during periods of demand. Next slide, please. I'll do that. Other areas that we wanted to focus on were, again, linking to the fact that home chargers who can take advantage of off-peak charging have the best value proposition for EVs, but very few of them are considering electric vehicles. We launched a website called cars.coned.com. That's with NRV, and what that does is it basically focuses and targets car buyers in general and surfaces for them the most comparable electric car in comparison to the vehicle that they are considering. And we think this is a valuable tactic because over 95% of car buyers aren't considering electric cars. Second is, in areas of market expansion, we are working on a pilot with the City of New York to provide curbside charging. That's also important because 40% of New Yorkers don't have their own dedicated charging. And we're also interested in facilitating private operation of chargers. We introduced a business incentive rate that offers an up to 40% reduction in demand charges, and through an EV proceeding, we proposed a per plug incentive on top of that, which still preserves operators' incentive to maximize utilization, which is good for the grid and maximizes grid benefits, while also improving the business case. I mentioned earlier Smart Charge. That's a program where we offer users an incentive to charge off-peak and avoid our summer peak period. It's an energy efficiency program. It's not a tariff. We use an onboard device on the car to do that, which is in many cases easier than let's say a metered solution. So, in closing, I'd say that we've been focusing on rolling out curbside charging, incentives, and education and outreach for people who can charge at home. We want to ensure that we increase electric vehicle benefits for all of our customers, not just drivers. So towards that end, looking at the transit and helping facilitate the transit and school bus market, and finally facilitating private investment in charging infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ari, and thank you, all three of you, for giving that program overview. Some very interesting things that are going on and planning here to start very soon. I've got some questions for our panelists, and I want to get right to those because I know that we've got a lot of questions coming in too. First, what are the challenges in the upfront design of a transportation electrification program? Carolyn, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. So a couple of things I would recommend folks think about that we had to address. One is when you're talking about building a program, you want to help support a competitive environment, but sometimes in terms of pricing and economies of scale, how does that balance with creating a cost-effective solution for your customers? Sometimes there's more buying power if you can go in and really support the whole investment on your own, but that might minimize some of the competitive nature of the marketplace itself. So really thinking about how you want to design it to help motivate a competitive marketplace, but making sure you're getting kind of the right pricing signal set up for customers. The second piece I would say, and I think this was addressed early on, especially in your first program, really thinking about your internal process and being comfortable with flexing and adjusting dynamically, sort of like a startup in the middle of a very large utility structure, because you are bringing various entities together to support the program operations early on, and these folks sometimes may not have done these types of activities before. And so it takes learning, education, training, and just being comfortable with kind of dynamically shifting as you learn new things and how you scale the program up. And the last thing is just balancing how you go to market with the types of projects that are available to you. There's large, cost-effective sites that you might come across, and how do you balance that with targeting those hard-to-reach areas, which will see a lot more benefit from the investment in question. So think about how you want to balance the two. Obviously, like a lot of these, any program like this, you're having to balance cost with scope and resource constraints. So it's just another layer of when you're thinking about how to design your program. Thank you.
All right, Melissa, we'll move on to you.
Sure. I think one of the things that's really key to building your first transportation electrification programs is understanding your customers and their business models and their approaches to these types of projects, their approval processes, their procurement processes. And there's a lot of variation if you're trying to serve many different customer types, from government to commercial to multi-unit dwellings. To echo what Carolyn said, that flexibility is key, and so something that SCE learned in our first pilot program is having all of the program agreements and many of the program processes in a tariff, which is later very difficult to change, unfortunately locks you in, makes you a little bit less nimble. So keeping, however you can keep flexibility in your program and how it's run is also really important. So I think that was a good point Carolyn brought up. Another challenge is that there may be changing regulatory requirements or building code requirements. So something that we were faced with was, our initial pilot was filed for in 2014, and after filing, there were new ADA requirements for sites, and because that wasn't factored into our original cost estimates, that ended up affecting our costs when it came time to launch our program in 2016, with most of its installations beginning in 2017. And again, back to understanding customers' business models, thinking about multi-unit dwellings. If you're trying to install parking charging stalls at condominiums and apartment buildings, really getting to understand, what the drivers are for the owners and managers of those types of facilities is key. They may look at EV charging as an amenity and want to compare it to other amenities they might be seeking to install to place at their sites. And so there's a lot of customer education, both on the ownership side and the resident side, that can help, tell the story of, why EV charging is important, why it's needed, and just, I would suggest be sure to have that education piece built into your program.
All right. And Andrew, could we also get your thoughts on this, maybe some best practices across the industry?
Yeah, I've got 2 key points. I'd like to, if you can notice all the diversity and variations of customer scenarios that Lisa, Carolyn, and Ari pointed out. You can see that there's different drivers, different factors to be tracked through a workflow design and process optimization up front. You need to, get into a mindset of mapping out different location requirements, different customer requirements, different construction requirements, and to handle that across all the different focuses from transit electrification, workplace electrification, residential programs. I know that the program leaders at those utilities on our panel have had to map out each of these activities into a careful workflow, and that's a really key opportunity to get stakeholder alignment, collaboration together. Secondly, as a utility first starts down a transport electrification pathway, capturing value and tracking value is key in the early efforts, whether it's a pilot or a first rollout. As you measure the value delivered and your ability to meet cost targets, to meet number of port targets, those are really critical to measure, monitor, and document so that when you go for your next rounds of approvals, maybe that's a regulatory approval or an organization approval, you'll have the data and the ammunition to expand your program further based on early best practices.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to move on to the next question, which is, what role has your utility played in making it easier for your customers to adopt EVs, and the role of the utility in promoting EV charging infrastructure? Ari, can we start with you on this one?
Yeah, sorry, I was answering a question on the Q&A. Can you repeat that for me, please?
Yeah, it's what role has your utility played in making it easier for your customers to adopt EVs, and the role of the utility in promoting EV charging infrastructure?
So, several parts. One is there is a role to play in terms of increasing education and awareness to customers. There's a lack of knowledge. So trying to provide that, and we're doing that through cars.connet.com, is one action. Helping facilitate charging infrastructure where it doesn't exist is another, and so we're doing that both with quick charging. I mentioned the new incentive rates. We will also be deploying charging in some of our underutilized property, quick chargers on our underutilized property for access by the public. And then finally, so providing incentives or benefits aligned with system value creation to just make the total cost of ownership better. And that works both for light-duty vehicles and then also medium and heavy-duty fleets as well.
All right, great. Lisa, any thoughts?
Yes, our company has instituted a few programs as well as rates and services for our customers to help ease their transition to adopting EVs. So among those are our Clean Fuel Reward, which now provides up to $1,000 rebate for the purchase of a new or used electric vehicle, our Charge Ready home installation rebate program, as well as EV rates. And so our first set of EV rates that were available to customers sought to reduce demand charges based on existing usage at a site. So the customer's existing demand at, let's say, the main building at a location could offset the new demand on the charging stations. But we've made further improvements, and our new EV rates that are coming out March 1st have a 5-year demand charge holiday and then phase back in facilities-related demand charges over the subsequent 5 years. And that really is meant to help customers and give them plenty of time to prepare for and develop their charging patterns and strategies and load management plans to really reduce their fueling costs. We've also developed what we call transportation electrification advisory services for our customers, so we can help with reviewing sites for feasibility of installing EV charging. We can work with customers who have fleet vehicles and do fleet assessments for them to help them build the business case for converting their fleet vehicles. And we're looking at a number of other services and tools that we can provide to our customers. Also on the fueling cost side, we, as part of our TE advisory services, we developed a GHG reduction calculator to help customers who have sustainability targets understand how much they're reducing and saving by converting, as well as a low carbon fuel standard credit calculator, so customers can see the dollars that they can recoup for fueling from the grid, which in many cases completely offsets the cost of their fueling from the grid. So those are just some of the areas where we've looked to help our customers adopt EVs.
All right, great. Another question here. This one's for Carolyn and Lisa. The question is, the relationship between electric vehicles or electric utilities and the customer is evolving continuously with DERs and electric vehicles. But what do you see as key customer concerns that need to be overcome around transportation electrification? Carolyn?
Sure, thank you. So I'd say first and foremost, the number one question and dialogue we have with our customers is around pricing and total cost of ownership with our infrastructure investment. Where some of the costs are more transparent than others, and so we really have to be prepared to spend time with customers to provide tools and or have direct dialogue with them to help coach them through all the different aspects of upfront costs versus ongoing O&M maintenance costs for operating and maintaining their charging infrastructure. And so that's really kind of, I would say, the number one item that we are continually addressing and really try to produce tools that help support that effort very upfront with the customer. I'd say the last item I would highlight is just general technology performance for customers as well. So, again, this is a new market. Lots of the customers that are now entertaining the thought of investing in charging infrastructure have never interacted with a charging station before, or very rarely have, and understanding, again, how to maintain it. What are the expectations of EV drivers when they're maintaining that charging station? And so, again, helping to educate them on what are some expected questions they should anticipate from their either their employees or their tenants as it relates to that charging station, and how to make it as easy for those drivers as possible. So I'd say that's another big one in our minds. Last point, which I'm sure will be covered as well, is just around pricing. When you start to talk to a driver about charging their electric vehicle, they are used to thinking about paying for fuel as $1 per gallon and not paying for electric charges and demand costs. So really trying to minimize the complexity that typically comes with electric rates as much as possible, so that you don't have customers choosing to move on from the conversation. So we really are continually looking at ways to help make the pricing as simple as possible and provide the right kind of format for our site hosts in particular about how they should be setting up the pricing for their EV drivers that use their charging infrastructure. So those are some main points. Thank you.
All right, Lisa?
Yeah, Carolyn really covered a lot of the points that I intended to, particularly around concerns over cost and total cost of ownership. But I would add infrastructure questions, infrastructure availability, how customers are going to get that installed is another one of their big areas of concern, which is why we focused our programs around providing infrastructure to those customers. There are a lot of challenges there, one on the customer side in terms of funding. So when you're working with, for example, school districts or some government agencies and even some commercial customers, they may have difficulty finding the funding available to support the infrastructure deployment on their own side. Another concern is just around changing technology. Customers, want to ensure that if they do these projects and install these assets, that they're going to be viable over the long term. One way we've addressed that is to really try to promote adoption of standards with our program. So charging connector standards and really promoting that when it comes to customer deployments, and particularly if it's through one of our programs. And then the challenge still remains around just awareness and perception. Some market segments are a lot further ahead than others in their understanding and awareness of transportation electrification. So there are still many sectors that, don't have as much awareness and still need a good bit of market education to support their journey. And I'd say another customer concern has to do with those that are leasing their properties. And getting, approvals from ownership to make, to do construction and make improvements at the site. So it's another area to be aware of that customers are concerned with.
All right, great. Next question here. With the growth of targets for C&I customers to adopt EVs, what are the main barriers and program challenges to bring on all these new customers and more complex charging infrastructure? Lisa?
Sure. I think we started to talk about some of these barriers. Again, on the program side, having enough flexibility to work with different types of customers is key. And to speak to more complex charging infrastructure, a good example is going to be with transit agencies and transit buses. There are already very viable vehicles. A lot of transit agencies in our territory have adopted these vehicles, but when they look to fully electrify their fleets, we're talking about significant changes to their site infrastructure changes, and how they are going to fit charging equipment physically into a yard and still have the free and efficient movement of those vehicles around the yard. So it's an interesting area that some of those customers are currently grappling with, and that will affect many other types of customers, such as warehouses and distribution centers, who will have, similar challenges. So again, it's a good idea to try and develop some advisory or consultative type services to help customers, in addition to providing support with the infrastructure and the construction itself, because all of those needs to be taken into consideration. Also, customers may be looking to include other DERs in these deployments, and they need support in determining what their true needs are, and that helps the utility plan for the appropriate capacity at the site. So while they may, estimate needing 2 megawatts of charging for, let's say all of their vehicles, they may be installing overhead charging that can support solar panels, and they might be able to install a megawatt of solar. So those are just some of the challenges, is just integrating all those different objectives and efforts and technologies, and having a more holistic approach with the customer when it comes to these types of projects.
All right, thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for that great discussion. With just a few minutes left, we've got several questions from the audience, and we just want to let you know that if we don't answer your question here during this webinar, that you will be contacted and your question will be answered post the webinar. But one real quick, this is a question for Carolyn directly. Hold on just a second. It's in your presentation, you alluded to 95% of transformers in a program need to be upgraded, and super urban areas are not allowed to be included in that same program. So what is the impact on infrastructure, CAPEX, support, et cetera, of large-scale EV program?
That is a very good question. I don't have the answer readily available. I'd have to talk to our construction team a little bit more about kind of where we're headed with some of the mechanics of where we're investing in. In general, we have to be, and that was specific for our fleet program, we have a specific defined budget for that program, so we, with specific targets in mind. So we have to be mindful of where we are investing those costs and what are cost-effective investments we can make. We're also internally figuring out, and maybe this is kind of what you're alluding to a little bit, we're in the very early stages of figuring out how the cost, depending on the type of work that needs to be done for a given project, where does that cost get spread? Is that are there like larger scale distribution planning costs that we need to address that are kind of outside the purview of our specific fleet program? So some of the mechanics of how the costs get spread across different recovery mechanisms that we have is some of the things we're still working through as we get that program off the ground.
All right, thanks, Carolyn. A next question, how are the utilities treating the customer side investment incentives, CAPEX or OPEX? Anybody like to tackle that one real quick?
I believe go ahead, Carolyn.
I was just going to say, I guess, for us specifically, we are capitalizing the infrastructure costs that for the projects we are building. That's, any infrastructure we put in the ground from the pole, and in some cases where we do the behind-the-meter work, all the way up to where the charging station gets installed. The costs that are expensed are, marketing, education, acquisition costs, rebate costs are expensed. So there's kind of a defined expense budget for those components that we manage annually and expense and that's kind of part of the portfolio, the budget portfolio for the respective programs in question that I talked about for PG&E.
All right.
Similar for SCE. Oh, sorry. That's okay.
No, go ahead.
Carolyn covered it.
Well, this has
capitalizing the utility and customer side infrastructure, and then expensing rebates and other costs. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, you guys have so much great information, and our audience has been so involved. We have received several questions, and just be assured that your question will be answered post-webinar. So we appreciate our panelists who have shared such great information, and for our audience today and your interest in this topic. That's all the time we have for today. A big thanks to our speakers, and just a reminder that today's webinar will be available on demand, and a link will be sent to you after the webinar. Now, this will include a link to West Monroe's Transportation Electrification white paper as well. And one plug-in here, Andrew, would you like to state this here for DistribuTech?
Yeah, we'd love to see everybody out at DistribuTech that would love to chat further about program design, program optimization. We thank everybody for your time.
All right. Well, thank all of you for your time. That's all the time we have today. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura Beth.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.